Dram watering tools have been the professional's choice for quality and durability for over 75 years. Use a Dram rain wand to create the softest shower of rain for your beds and containers, a 9-pattern revolver spray gun for a variety of uses, or a Colour Storm sprinkler for a lush green lawn and garden. Dram, the professional's choice for lawn and garden. Available at a fine garden centre near you. Visit us online at dramm.com.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Argue About Plants, the podcast for people who love plants.
Just not always the same ones.
I'm Steve Aiken, the editor of Fine Gardening Magazine.
And I'm Danielle Sherry. I'm your senior editor from Fine Gardening Magazine. Did you forget who you were the last time, Steve?
I don't know what you're talking about.
For listeners, this is take number 2 or 3. I can't remember. And each time, Steve blamed me because apparently my transmission froze and he just didn't fill in what his name was or who he was. So I think quarantine has gotten to Steve that he doesn't know who he is anymore.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I hope we leave all that in.
Gary, don't cut it. Don't cut it. So today, moving on, we have a topic that I can't believe we haven't done this yet, actually. Can you, of all the topics, 68 topics, and we're sometimes struggling to come up with topics, why have we not done Nooks and Crannies plants yet? Teeny tiny steppables.
No, I think we were saving them.
Oh, really? You think this is
right now?
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So go into the definition of what comes to mind for you when you think of Nooks and Crannies plants.
I think of, the first thing that comes to mind is Thomas's English muffin, which is where I think we got the phrase Nooks and Crannies. Am I wrong?
No, but that was so funny. You almost made me spit out my water, and that really would have put a damper on the...
We all saw that. But I think the phrase Nooks and Crannies comes from Thomas's English muffins, doesn't it?
I think it does, yeah. And that was like a superior English muffin or a superior muffin because all the butter and the jelly gets into all those
Nooks
crevices.
And Crannies. Yeah, and that's what made it better than other English muffins. I don't think the phrase Nooks and Crannies was out there until that product. Yeah.
So in terms of plants.
Well, little guys that can go into little spaces, those little corners, those awkward little spots in between rocks or paving stones or corners, basically wherever a weed would go. And it's really hard to dig it out because it's in some little crevice. This is where you want these plants to go. Yes,
true. And I always think of stone walls and, kind of in those pockets of stone walls or along the edge of a stone wall where it kind of fills in, or a retaining wall, it fills in and kind of cascades over a bit. I don't know why I always think of stone walls, but maybe that's because of what I have in my garden and where I need my cracks and crevices.
Yeah. But, they're often the finishing touch, just that little parsley on the plate, kind of thing that makes a garden somewhat a little bit more special. It's that little touch,
I think you explained it earlier when we were just, throwing the topic out there, is the details. It's all about they're the perfect little details that, oftentimes get ignored or thrown by the wayside for the focal point plants or the plants that you layer in. But these are important little frosting plants.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you stole my first plant.
I did not.
Yes.
It was on my list, and then you jumped the gun and sent your list way in advance, and I didn't have a chance because I was not actually at my desk when this happened.
Oh, you weren't actually working, and I was working, so...
No, I was in the test garden while you were lounging about, in your slippers with your iced tea. But I had there were 2 species of these plants at the Super Cool Plant Sale.
Yes.
Sponsored by Fine Gardening. And you had one Actually, I planted them both.
You
And
did? Okay.
yeah, and you have one on your list, and I, at the last minute said, well, I really want to do mine. Can we have two of the same species on there?
And I said yes, because I like to humor you on occasion.
You just didn't want to hear me whine.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So all right, so we're talking about, listeners, about Erodium, which is Alpine geranium. It's sometimes called its common name. So Steve, what species did you go with?
I went with Erodium chrysanthemum, whose common name is yellow heron's-bill.
Okay. Which makes no sense.
Well, no, it looks like a geranium, which is known as crane's bill.
Yeah.
Crane,
Yeah.
heron, kind of the same thing. And mine is actually, yellow, so that's why it's called that. But I went with Erodium chrysanthemum, and you went with
Erodium ricardii, which
so
is
why don't we start with that one? No, you start.
Okay, all right. Because you look good now, Steve.
It's a first.
All right, so I went with Erodium ricardii, like I said, and I guess the common name is just straight up Alpine geranium. And I did get this from the plant sale, I believe. I couldn't remember, so I'm glad you reminded me of that. So it really does. It's this teeny tiny, like 2 to 3 inches tall and about 6 inches wide, allegedly, over time. To me, it looks like teeny tiny little fern fronds that are, just super compact and make this little tuft of foliage. And then it kind of sends up just the tiniest little stem with a really beautiful white flower, yellow center to it, and the veins on the flower are pink. So a lot of times people think that the flowers are pink. I love this. It blooms in spring and kind of into the early summer, depending on how hot we get. I put it in a really bad spot, though. I have this weeping larch that I love, and it's right on the edge of a stone wall. And I needed something to kind of fill in the understory. So I did exactly what you're not supposed to do. And I put it in the opposite conditions that it likes, which is moist, well-drained, fertile soil. I put it in dry shade. And it's struggling. I noticed, especially last year, it did decent because I was good about watering it. This year, I've not been good about watering it. We just hit about a week's worth of 90-degree weather, and it is starting to burn and crisp up. So I think I need to remove it, relocate it. But I originally planted this too because I thought it would be great as a like a teeny tiny little brother to my Biacovo, larger geranium, perennial geranium that I've got, kind of on the opposite end of that bed. They're kind of like the big brother and little brother versions. I don't think I mentioned that this is zone 6 to 9. I think that's like, I don't know. Zone 6 sounds a little too warm. I feel like zone 5 might be okay for this guy. And I saw conflicting zones. So let's say solid 6 to 9, maybe even pushed into zone 5.
So you're killing it.
I mean, I'm killing it. And I feel so bad because it's so tiny and petite and lovely. And it did so well last year. But that was completely the wrong place to put it. I mean, it's competing for water with this, 7-year-old, 8-year-old weeping larch. And yeah, I'm killing it. It's bad.
So first, I wish I had counted how many times you said teeny tiny in that thing.
It's going to be the theme today. Yeah. So that was Alpine geranium, Erodium ricardii.
Yeah. So I planted that too.
Okay.
And I did much better at killing mine because it didn't even come back this year.
Okay. Now I feel better.
So it might have come back. I might have pulled it out as a weed. I have no idea, but it is certainly not growing in my garden now. This spring, came around and I looked at my little rock garden area, and there was this floofy, sort of feathery, fern-like tuft of foliage Pretty big, like about 10 inches wide. Floofy is the word. It's about 10 inches wide, and it was hard to miss. And the plants were arranged in such a way that I could tell I planted them because they were like, in like a little triangle kind of thing. And so I know that I planted them, but I had no idea what they were. So I have no idea what that plant is. I know I planted it, no clue as to what it was. And then eventually it bloomed. And I said, oh, that's one of those things. And I went back and found the plant tag to it. And that's when I realized I had Erodium ricardii or whatever it was that you had too. And that's nowhere to be seen in my garden at all. So what I have is Erodium chrysanthemum, which is different from yours. It's much larger. Yours is teeny tiny and much more delicate. This one's large. It gets to be about maybe about 6 inches tall, and then the flowers shoot up another 2 or 3 inches above that. And mine has to be about 10 inches wide now, and it's in like season. Season one of it. Just a decent size. It's a beautiful mound of like I said, that feathery foliage. That's kind of like a gray silver. It looks really cool, especially like surrounded by gravel. Because it's in a rock garden. The leaves kind of remind me of like a curly kale. Where it's like really frilly along the edges, and then the inside is kind of like smooth. It gets a pale yellow flower. It's still kind of blooming, but maybe early to mid June. So like early summer, I would say. It's the flower shape is like it's the shape that kids draw when they draw a flower. Just like the loops going around in a circle. It's a geranium leaf. Just like the little lumps going around. Just a great, wonderful, charming little plant. Full sun. Okay, not like yours that wanted shade apparently, or didn't. I don't know. And well drained soil. Wanted it hot and dry basically. This plant it's native to Greece, the mountains of Greece. So hot, dry, rocky, sandy. That's what it likes, and it's doing really well for me. And apparently has a deep taproot to it. I haven't dug it up to find that out. But just a great plant. And I would love to stick this in little corners, where there are rocks and just hot, dry, rocky spots. And I'd love to get some more of this. It's a Erodium chrysanthemum. Yellow heronsbill is what it is. Zone 6 to 8. It had no trouble with our zone 6, though we had a mild winter.
Yeah.
Had no trouble with ours. But just a great plant.
Yeah, I was amazed at the difference between the actual leaf structures between the two plants. I mean, yours definitely does. Like that was the perfect comparison. It looks like a blue curly kale, only it got zapped by the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids gun. It shrunk it right down. And then the ricardii has more of a almost maidenhair fern shrunk by the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids gun. It's a little bit greener, not as textural as yours is. But yeah, I mean, they're both good plants, and clearly our problem is that we're just bad at killing plants, or we're good at killing plants.
Right. But yours is much more dainty and delicate, and that's the one I really wanted. And I kind of only took the Erodium chrysanthemum because they were left over. And it turns out to be the superior plant,
How funny is that? All right. Since you stole my plant last time, I'm going now. And I know for a fact that you haven't stolen any of my other plants. So I have 2 plants that I've actually grown and 1 plant that I really want to grow. So dealer's choice. Which one? Which one should I talk about?
I don't know, but that's exactly what I have too. So.
Oh, no way. All right. So let's do the one that we don't grow, but we want to grow. Mine is Blue Star Creeper, which I feel like we talked about. Maybe you talked about in a previous episode. Am I right on that? Have you talked about this?
I don't know, but do go on. I have opinions. So.
Oh, okay. All right. So this is Isotoma is the genus name, and it's like Fulvitabilis or something like that. I don't know. Fulvitabilis. We'll go with that.
Well, this plant has like 3 or 4 Latin names. Like you look at Blue Star Creeper, there's a whole bunch of different.
Yeah, it's like synonym of this, synonym of that. But the one that I'm talking about, and it's pretty universal. You see it a ton down south and also on the West Coast. And it's this adorable little plant I think we're going to say that a lot on this episode. But it has teeny tiny little teardrop shaped green leaves. It kind of just looks like a green carpeted plant for most of the year. And then in mid-spring, this thing bursts forth with all of these sky blue star-shaped flowers. And it looks like a miniaturized version of creeping phlox. It is beautiful when it's creeping over. I mean, it's commonly used as a ground cover, but when it's used as a nooks and crannies plant in between stone walls and such, it almost looks like a waterfall. It really looks like water from a distance when it's in full bloom. And it's a tough plant. I mean, I've seen it growing out of cracks and crevices and so on and so forth. It's zone 6 to 8, so we could grow it, but I forget about it until I see it in photos and see it from photo shoots that I've been on and thought, why am I not growing this plant? It's full sun to partial shade, so it will tolerate a little bit of shade. It wants that moist, well-drained soil again, so maybe that's why I'm not growing it, because I don't have that. I have well-drained, not moist. And really 2 to 3 inches tall and about 1 to 2 feet wide. So this really does take off and fill in everything. But it's like it's water embodied in a plant. To me, that's what it looks like. I really do enjoy it. I love it. And
you love it because you haven't grown it.
Yeah, right. Because it's terrible. I mean, so many designers we know use it and love it, and we've featured it so many times in the magazine.
And where are these designers?
Down south and on the West Coast. Uh-oh. What?
Well, so the theme for this show for me was brought it home from the plant sale, planted it, and it never came back. So
you are not a good judge of this, though, because how long did it live in a pot on the side of your driveway? And you're like, that plant didn't live. I put it through hell. It didn't live.
All right. So can I tell the story, or do you just want to?
Yes, go ahead. All right.
Normally I do what you said, but I actually got these in the ground, in a decent amount of time. I planted, they're in little 4-inch pots, so they're just little dudes. And I had maybe like 10 or 12 of them, and I dotted them around in nice ground cover fashion. And it was in an area that I actually watered, because I planted a lot of things in this area. And I'm like, well, what are these things supposed to do? They're supposed to spread. Like, what's happening? They're just sitting in their little squares. And so I ignored them for a little weeks, for a couple of weeks, and they started. I didn't give them much attention, and they spread. They spread into nice, like round clumps. So it was maybe 10, 12 inches from 4 inches in a year, and that was great, and exciting. This year, nothing. Nothing. Not even a hint that there was ever a plant there. It's like they packed their bags and moved out in the middle of the night. No goodbye, no nothing. And everything else in this area came back. Rodgersia, which I've killed a number of times, came back.
Yeah.
The finicky disporum that I got from J.C. Ralston last year, those finicky Japanese shade plant, that came back. The crested painted ferns that I had tortured came back. Everything came back in this area, but no blue star creepers. Zero.
Do you think that, okay, so those are all shade plants. So do you think not enough sun, or maybe winter moisture? Because I did read winter moisture is the enemy of this plant, that it does this weird rot. It kind of rots from the center out and just turns black when it doesn't have the proper drainage.
Yeah. So I think this is just not a plant for where we live.
New England.
I have seen it in California, where this one gentleman was growing it in his grass. And so it looked like the grass was flowering. The foliage on this thing is so small that I was surprised that you're even describing it, because you need a magnifying glass to see it. It just looks like a little mat of green, and it's a wonderful plant for where it can grow. Like, I've seen it growing, mostly in California in dry places, and we had a photo of it where the person has the driveway that's just like the two concrete strips,
Yeah.
and then the blue star creeper was in the middle, and it looked amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my one brief attempt at it was a flop. So
Okay.
I would not recommend it for Connecticut. I would go with Mazus. Mazus is a much better low growing creeping ground cover. But yeah, but if you had the right conditions and you had a nook and cranny, this would be the perfect plant for it.
Or if you live anywhere other than New England, which, we do
Right,
the show for people other than New England. So this would be good for you. Send me pictures so I can live vicariously through you, because Steve has convinced me that I should not plant this plant.
You shouldn't. Everybody else should.
So, okay, do your plant that you haven't, that you pine for, but you have not actually grown.
Well, saxifrage, creeping saxifrage.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Also known as strawberry begonia.
Yep.
So it's Saxifraga stolonifera.
Mm-hmm.
Trying not to sneeze. Good, made it. Zone 6 to 9, supposedly. Mm-hmm. Although the six is iffy, because I will not grow this, because I don't think it will grow here. I think in a mild winter, in the right protected spot, it would grow here. This is also grown as a house plant too. You grow it as a house plant, and it's also known as Mother of Thousands because of how it spreads. So this is a plant that likes partial to full shade. Mm-hmm. Moist soil is essential. I've never seen it in a not moist spot. Maybe 6 inches tall, maybe a little bit more, but it gets these round, dark green leaves that have these silver veins to them, and then underneath that's like a pinkish red tone to them, and it's just a wonderful effect to it. And it spreads by stolons. So if you think strawberries, it's just like this thin thread goes out, and then it sets down a plant, and a new plant grows, and it can form these massive colonies. But when it spreads itself to like a little nook or cranny, and it kind of settles in there, it just looks amazing. Because you have like this, usually it's like this dark little corner, and then all of a sudden you've got this thing with silver leaves, and red undersides to it, growing there, and it looks really cool. And then I guess around May, in that where spring is starting to turn into summer, it gets these flowers. So it sends up these long flower stalks, maybe like 12 inches tall, and it has like these. It sort of looks like a shuttlecock from badminton. Where there's like the ball at the top and then the petals hang down. But it's only like 2 or 3 white petals.
I think they're god awful ugly. I think the flowers are really ugly. I feel like it's almost like a hosta. Cut it off.
when they're in a mass, they look stunning. I think they're great. We'll let the listeners, viewers decide. But this is a plant I've always wanted to grow. It just looks amazing. I love it in just those little nooks and crannies, like we're talking about. Like whenever it starts to grow there, I'm like, oh, that is exactly what I want to do with that plant. But I don't have the conditions for it.
Is one of its common names strawberry begonia?
I think I already said that, but yeah.
Did you? I'm sorry. I know.
Thanks for listening, Danielle.
I know this is an audio exercise where I'm supposed to listen, but it really does. It looks like a begonia leaf. It looks like exactly like a begonia leaf, and it's odd that it's not in that family, which is kind of strange. It's not in the genus, but yeah, I think it's cool. I think it's good looking. I've seen it elsewhere, particularly out in the Seattle area, used as kind of a ground cover and understory plant. Very beautiful, but yeah, I've shied away from ever planting it myself because I have seen it in greenhouses as a houseplant, and that to me says it ain't gonna work in Connecticut.
Right. I mean, I've seen it. I don't think I've seen it north of Maryland. But I've seen it out west, and I've seen it in the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast.
Yeah.
It's a great shade plant. I've seen it in Atlanta, but I don't think we can grow it here. But that's one. If I could grow it, I absolutely would.
Now, the way that you were describing it, it sounds like it could get a little thuggish. Yes. Thoughts on that? Okay, all right. So this is
but easily controlled. It sends out like a long, arching thread, basically saying, I'm going to spread here, okay? And then if you don't like that, you snip the thread.
You rip it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they come out easily. And if you do nothing, it's like, okay, fine, we're going to colonize here, and then now we're going to go over there. And so it forms these really nice colonies. But it can also go into these weird little spaces
where nothing else will grow.
Well, and it's going to get established while still attached to the mother plant.
Next plant I am going to talk about is a plant that I have only had for 1 year, but I love it thus far. It's called either cliff or Alpine sedum. Sedums just in general, I mean, I feel like we got to give some love to sedums overall as a genus for Nooks and Crannies. I mean, they will take the worst of the worst soil. They will take the worst of the worst hot, dry conditions, and they pretty much thrive almost no matter where you throw them. They really are tough plants. And especially, a lot of the sedums that you see in alpine situations, they don't look like the first thing that comes to mind when you think of sedum. I mean, I don't know about everybody else, but, I think of, sedum, boring. But there's a lot of really, really cool alpine type of sedums. And this one is Sedum glaucophyllum, and discovered it last year. Really, really loved it. It was in the Alpine section of the nursery. I planted it along kind of this edge of our patio that is really super dry, gets a lot of sun, gets a lot of radiant heat. Now, what I will say is I'm fairly certain it was labeled as Sedum glaucophyllum, but when I Googled this plant, everything that I saw is the photos of it kind of are of a light green. And mine is definitely a pale yellow. So
the foliage is pale yellow?
Yeah.
Well,
so it's kind of bleached out.
But if you listen to the Latin name, glauca, glaucus meaning bluish, phylum meaning leaf, it should be like a bluish leaf.
It's a little more yellow than that, but I don't know if that's because it's bleaching out in the sun. I'm not watering it. It could very well be because the form, the shape, everything looks the same. And I even Googled, is there an aria, as a cultivar or anything? Nope, couldn't find that. So I'll put a little caveat. It might be a cultivar that's a yellow cultivar of that, but I'm not sure. Judge for yourself when you look at the photos. But it's zones 4 to 9. This thing's doing awesome. It kind of has these little teeny tiny rosettes that cleave off, and the little rosettes kind of multiply. So this giant, it's a relative term, 2 to 4 inches tall and about 6 to 8 inches wide. The rosette kind of eventually spreads out to be this 8-inch wide, really, really tight and compact succulent for northern locales. I guess there's no other way to describe it other than a super compact rosette, but it does get flowers. I snip them off because I find them ugly. Midsummer, it puts out these weird squid-like arms that burst forth out of the middle of this rosette, and then they get this almost pale white flower that comes out of it, pineapple-like. I mean, a squid-like arm with a pineapple on it, it just says no to me. So I just cut them off because I think it's ugly. But tough, very, very tough. I probably have it in one of the worst locations that I have garden space, and it has thrived. Did really, really well over the winter. I think that's because well-drained soil, kind of on a little bit of an embankment. So it didn't sit with winter wet. If it sits in winter wet, this thing's a goner for sure.
So I had this mini monster movie going in my head while you're describing it, so that somewhere like they're like spider mites living in terror of these squid-like arms with the pineapples on them, and along comes the giant, with its claws to cut off the arms of this thing. Thank God she saved us. So you could be the hero in some small insects horror movie, monster movie, whatever they're called. Yeah.
But you know how sedums do sometimes, especially these ground cover sedums. They put out this weird shadoinkala thing, this arm with flowers, and you're just like, why are you bothering? This is silly. Stop it. Stop flowering. You don't need to.
And I love this plant because you named it Cliff, and I thought that was great. Everybody loves somebody named Cliff.
Yeah.
But I was intrigued because an Alpine sedum. I'm like, well, that's interesting. I don't think I've ever seen that before. But then you described it, and I kind of lost interest because it has those yellow leaves. I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound right. So I'm going to fall in love with the wrong plant, and nobody wants that. But yeah, sedums are great for nooks and crannies, and I don't know why I didn't think of to put any of them on my list. I've killed a bunch of smaller leaf sedums through neglect. I mean, it's almost hard to kill a sedum, but I've done it. Yeah.
It was pretty interesting. Listeners should stay tuned because we have an expert from California who weighs in with some really cool other sedums that she grows as nooks and cranny plants. So if you need a tough as nails, hot sun, nooks and crannies plant with well drained, really crappy soil, stay tuned because sedums are your go-to plant.
But it's interesting. We've been recommending a lot of plants that are good for the west, the south of the west. When normally we're all northeast.
Yeah.
So this is pretty cool. This is good for us.
It is good. We're branching out. So continue our streak. Branch out, Steve. What do you got next?
I don't know if this plant is good. I don't think it's good for the West. I know it's good for the Pacific Northwest, but I don't think it's good for California. And I'm talking about the plant that I thought you were going to take. And I think I reserved this like a month in advance. So don't talk about this one because I don't talk about this one. And it's European wild ginger, Asarum europaeum. And it's only zones 4 to 7. That's why I don't think it's going to, mid to Southern California is really going to do well. I'm not sure about Denver or anything like that. But it kind of looks like the saxifrage in that it has like these round green leaves. I always think of them as like big green tiddlywinks or big green poker chips. They're like the size, they're bigger than a quarter, maybe the size of like a $50 sized leaf. And I see you wincing there. Like
what is a tiddlywink? I don't know what what is it? I don't know what a tiddlywink is. I know what a poker chip is. What is it?
You've never played tiddlywinks?
That sounds a little dirty. I don't know what that is.
It's a child's game where essentially you have two like poker chip type things, and like you press one against the other and you shoot it, like a little. You play tiddlywinks. You try to get it in like a cup or something like that. You play tiddlywinks. You're safe. You're safe to Google it after the show. So,
all right.
At least I think. I mean, who knows? I'm kind of out of it. Being 50.
Don't Urban Dictionary it. Okay.
Well, make sure it's tiddlywinks, not widdly tinks, because who knows what you're going to get then. But tiddlywinks. If you Google that, you'll find a child's game. That everyone at home, I'm sure, is saying, like, how can she not know what tiddlywinks are?
I don't know what that is.
Okay.
Was it in the same vein as Lincoln Logs? I mean, I know what those are.
Anyway, poker chips, silver dollar size, glossy green, just round foliage, these little disc shaped foliage with lighter veins. Not like saxifrage, but like you can see the veins, so they kind of show up. Just a charming little tight clump of a plant, not even 6 inches tall. Maybe like after a few years, it can get to be about a foot. But expected to get to be about 8 to 10 inches in a couple of years. Zones 4 to 7, maybe 8, maybe 9. I was seeing it all over the place. And I've even seen it down to zones 2. But this is how good this is for cracks and crevices. I went to Ireland in October, and we went to the Cliffs of Moher on the western coast of Ireland. Wind swept, wet. All the plants are growing sideways because of all the wind, and it's just constantly moist. And we're there, and there's like the massive rocks, and you're walking around. And I look down, and I see growing in the cracks there, just wild, is Asarum europaeum. And I took a picture of it. I'm like, that can't be, because I struggle to get this going in my garden. But but once they're happy, because it needs moist soil, and I tend to dry out a little bit. It's growing there, and so then I look around at all the cracks in the sidewalks and everything around this place. There's a Serum europaeum growing like a weed there, and it probably is a weed, because one country's weed is the other country's ornamental.
Yeah.
And it will reseed around a little bit. I actually have a seedling growing, I actually have a spot in my yard, and I should take a picture of it, where I have one clump that's growing just fine, doing great. And right across, maybe, like 1.5 feet, 2 feet across these steps, is a spot where there's a clump that's struggling. Mm-hmm. And below that step is another spot that is bare dirt, where another one died out. And I have some more growing in another spot where I make sure to keep it moist. It's growing amidst rocks. But again, another thing that looks great, in and amidst, nooks and crannies with this tight green foliage. It's just a charming little plant. It flowers, like the flowers hang down beneath the foliage. I don't think I've ever seen them. I'm not going to get on my knees and spraying to look at this weird brown jug, whatever it looks like, flower. So it's not that. Partial to full shade, moist soil. It will not take dry. That's why I'm struggling with it over in this area. There is a native version of this. There's a native a Serum canadense, which we've talked about on the show before. And the leaves aren't as glossy, and the clump is a little looser. And this one's tighter, more glossy. It's better looking plant. But I love chucking it into any shady nook that I have, and hope that it's moist enough for it.
I think, I've got an awesome patch of it in my garden, in the one teeny tiny little area of shade that I have on the north side of the house. And I've mixed it in with some mini hostas, a golden mini hosta that I have, and a little variegated mini hosta. And it just kind of mingles in between, nooks and crannies can be the nook and cranny between several other plants. And this got the European ginger kind of fills that all in. It is massed out over the years. I had one clump.
About how big?
The original clump now is probably more than 1.5 feet across. Wow. And I keep cleaving off pieces and parts of it. So I've kind of staggered it all across the front of this little shady area. We'll post a picture. Hey, this is a good time to tell listeners that if they go to finegardening.com and they go to the podcast tab, we post plant lists and we post pictures of all the plants that we talk about. So if you miss a plant name, or you really want to see what this looks like, because I have no idea what a tiddlywink looks like, you can go online and see these pictures. But I'll post a picture of the mass of it that I have. It is a stunning plant.
Did you ever play pickup sticks?
Yes, I know what pickup sticks are.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like that kind of
all right,
classic
okay.
game.
All right.
There's a reason nobody plays it anymore.
Or no. All right. Okay. All right. Well, since you brought us back to your childhood of thrilling and exciting things like plastic discs that jump around, I'm gonna take you back to my childhood for a second, and just talk about a heartstring plant that happens to be a awesome nooks and crannies plant. One of my earliest memories about gardening, other than weeding the dreaded vegetable garden, was my mom was part of a garden club, and she had once taken me to this an elderly woman's garden who was in the garden club, and we were touring around, and I was bored as heck and couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do with myself. But I got enchanted by this.
I bet you wished you had some tiddlywinks at that point. You could have whiled away the hours. To
entertain myself with jumping plastic poker chips. So I kept noticing this really, what I thought was a really cool little plant that was in all of her nooks and crannies, in between the stone wall, in between all of the little plant areas that, nothing else would grow. And I was so charmed by it. It had these almost ivy looking leaves and these tiny little pink snapdragon-y type flowers. And turns out it was Kenilworth ivy, and which is Cymbalaria moralis, Kenilworth ivy, zones 4 to 8. And I thought it was the coolest thing because this woman saw that I was so infatuated with this teeny tiny little plant that she just took her trowel, dug it up, and gave me a clump of it. So then I was, holding this clump of Kenilworth ivy throughout the rest of it. And she probably gave it to me so I would just calm down and be quiet. But brought it home, grew it in, a little section of my mom's garden. And it just left this lasting impression with me that I love so much. So now I grow it, not very well because I don't have a lot of shade, and it really does prefer shade to partial shade. Kind of spreads around like an ivy, but isn't invasive in that way. It does like to mass out, kind of vines around on the ground, 2 inches tall. So it's little, but 12 to 18 inches wide. If it gets a little rambunctious though, it's almost like impatiens, where you can just pull the little seedlings out. It's really, really easy to keep under control. And I just love it. I mentioned the little flowers. The leaves really are charming. It almost has a succulent little lily pad like look to the leaves. I really like it. Chances are, if you've been in an old school greenhouse of somebody's, you'll see Kenilworth ivy that has seeded itself into the gravel or into the nooks and crannies of the greenhouse. It tends to be one of those plants that just shows up in a greenhouse no matter what. But it really is, it's a plant that in shade makes a really charming nooks and crannies plant.
You mentioned it, and what came to mind was the saxifrage that I mentioned. Like, how similar in looks is it to the saxifrage?
The leaf is a Kelly green. It is a bright green, and it doesn't really have any veining or anything like that to the leaf. Looks almost like it should be in the Plectranthus family over anything else. Okay. I feel like giving it Kenilworth ivy, you see the ivy and you go, oh God, no, not that invasive, not that plant. But it's not like an ivy. It's more like a Plectranthus. I guess not entirely stunning foliage, but just a really solid, cool, green, lily pad looking leaf to it.
So we spent some time in the shade here. I want to take us back to the sun.
Or
okay. At least the partial sun, partial shade. And okay. I have a little charmer that I want to start putting into my nooks and crannies. It's called Dixon. I have a little charmer that I want to put into the nooks and crannies of the garden. Thanks for the sticker, Danielle. You saved me.
You're welcome. All right, let's pick up. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Dixon's
I'm a 12-year-old boy.
That's all right. No. I put it out there. I walked right into it. It happened. Dixon's gold bellflower is the plant that I want to talk about. Zones 3 to 8. And we know campanulas, and it's Campanula Dixon's gold. Campanulas come in a lot of shapes and sizes. And this is a low mound, maybe 4 to 6 inches tall. He's going to get maybe a foot wide, and it's a mound of chartreuse to gold foliage, and it's really charming, really really stunning. And then in the early June time frame, it gets these star-shaped flowers that are in the lavender to blue range, and it's so great that I posted it on the Let's Argue About Plants Instagram page, and I got a comment from El Sorbo Creative, who, I said, normally it's more chartreuse, but when it's covered with flowers like this, I don't seem to mind. And then El Sorbo Creative, which I like to read as El Sorbo Creative, but it's just the initial L for Lisa. I checked. So Lisa
Okay.
Sorbo said, but are they lavender or purple flowers? And
Oh.
I started to like, oh, I'll type an answer. And then I realized she had listened to the episode about
Yes.
blue plants, where I confess that I really have no idea about the difference between lavender and purple and blue. And,
Lisa, you need to come on to the podcast. Lisa and I are going to do the next podcast with Steve because oh, yes, I love it.
yeah. So I
Zing
responded.
him.
I said that I almost fell for that. And I said, Danielle would say that they're lavender, because I couldn't say with any reliability. So like a lavender flower with a gold leaf, it's a plant that looks awesome with itself. And it's just this little mound. It takes a while to expand, and they should get like, I guess, 10 inches to a foot. Mine aren't nearly that big. Great for edging because they're short. Mine are more green chartreuse than chartreuse gold. And obviously this is like all plants, like the more sun you get it, the more gold it gets, the more shade you give it, the more green it gets. But I've been reading a lot of warnings about it, that you should not give it too much, like beware of hot afternoon sun, beware of blazing sun. And I have it in partial shade. So I don't know. And I haven't grown it in other places. So I think this is one of those plants that it can go right up to the line between full sun and partial shade, like wherever that line is, like that's where you want to plant it. And you'll get if you move it an inch, away, it's going to burn, and you move it another inch away, it's going to be more chartreuse than gold, but it can be really just stunning gold foliage. And because it's so small and compact and stunning, it should be great for tucking into little areas. And I definitely want to try it in more places. That's Campanula Dixon's Gold.
It is pretty stunning. When you posted that photo, I looked at it and it really just looked like a plant that was composed of all flowers.
Wait, are you El Sorbo?
No.
Oh. I didn't know if that was like
It's my pseudonym.
Yeah,
so I can
some alter ego that you have. Okay.
So I can get on our social platforms and troll you.
Yeah. But if you're not, and if Lisa Sorbo Creative is a real person, I am now declaring her the listener of the month.
I love it. I second it.
And now, because everything sounds better with a British accent, here's Peter to talk about Nooks and Crannies, which apparently have nothing to do with English muffins, which probably aren't even English to begin with.
I believe it is safe to say that we all want the same thing: a garden that delights us and delights visitors. Of course, the latter are easier to please than ourselves. We will always notice the weed, or the gap in the foliage, or the plant that is flopping in a manner we did not intend. Visitors, thankfully, usually miss our mistakes. One thing we all notice in a garden, on some level, are the smaller moments, the nooks and crannies, as Steve and Danielle have so aptly called them. Broad strokes are fine, but it is the attention to detail that sets the artist apart. The visitor might not notice all of our touches, but on some level, they are aware that there is attention to detail in this garden. For us, we know that little corner, that open spot beneath the arching foliage, needed something, and we put it there. Without some level of spectacle, the specimen tree, the water feature, the bit of sculpture, a garden is bland. But theatricality must be complemented by the smaller moments. Otherwise, the garden can only be experienced from afar. Without these smaller moments, there is no need to inspect and spend time with the garden. You got it before you were even in it. So take time to fill in your nooks and crannies. They will give your garden charm, and although not everyone will see it, they will feel it.
Steve, it's not often that I'm disappointed with, Peter's little part in our podcast, but he didn't mention English muffins at all. I'm upset.
I think you're just mad that he didn't take a swipe at me.
I know. I am kind of mad about that. Hopefully our expert takes a swipe at you, though. Let's see who's up.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Sweet, owner of my landscape design company, Harmony in the Garden, located in Zone 9, Granite Bay, California. In my garden, our winter lows are about 28 degrees or so, and our summer highs are regularly in the 90s to 100s. I do, however, also garden extensively in my family's Zone 6 Lake Tahoe garden, so I'm very familiar with winters that have 10 feet of snow or more. Why am I telling you all of this? Well, because I have some pretty amazing plants that thrive not only in my temperate Zone 9 garden, but also do really, really well in colder Zone 6. As a designer, I view any bare spot as a planting opportunity. I mean any bare spot. A little corner where two stones don't quite meet up, or a gap in the pathway, anything counts. Give me a tiny patch of ground and I'll find a plant to fill it. The way I look at it is if I don't fill it, nature will with something usually much less desirable. I found that it's often the tiniest details in the garden that really give it that wow factor. Sure, everybody notices the giant bougainvillea vine scrambling up a wall or a beautiful specimen tree in full bloom, but they also notice the little flowering daisy or the colorful succulent discreetly tucked into a stone wall. So, what are a few of my favorites to tuck in here and there? First and foremost, I would be lost without succulents. And yes, there are several varieties that come back year after year in Zone 6, even after being buried under a ton of snow all winter. The fast drainage of shallow pockets within rock walls means succulents are ideal choices, as succulents hate having soggy roots. Succulents also have very shallow roots, perfect for the tight spaces of nooks and crannies. Succulents typically want full or partial sun, partial especially in climates as hot as mine. The first succulent I use over and over again for nooks and crannies are the super tough sempervivums, also called hens and chicks or house leeks. Sempervivums come in a wide range of sizes and colors, and they typically form a flower-like rosette, with the main rosette, or the hen, producing several babies, or chicks, each season. Once the mother plant flowers, it will die, but don't worry, as there's usually several babies beneath it that you can either leave in place or transplant to another nook and cranny in your garden. Royal Ruby is one of my favorite sempervivums, as the long and slender leaves on the rosette turn different shades of dusky rose, depending on how stressed it becomes. The hotter or colder it is, the redder it will turn. The rosettes can grow quite large, sometimes up to 5 inches, with its tiny offshoots, or chicks, nestled at its base. Royal Ruby is a prolific succulent that sends out lots of offshoots, so you'll have plenty to spread around your garden or give to your friends. When designing a garden, one of the tenets I keep in mind is to focus on repetition and contrast, whether in color, texture, or form. Succulents for nooks and crannies are no exception. So I'll focus on contrasting colors by planting the Royal Ruby with another favorite of mine called Sempervivum Black. This rosette, however, isn't black at all, but a bright, fresh green color that has dark maroon tips on each of the slender leaf. The combination of lime green and maroon is striking, and when you place it near the plum colors of the Royal Ruby, get ready to fall in love. The second family of cold and heat-tolerant succulents I use are the sedums, also called stone crops. These are some of the most cold-tolerant succulents there are, growing even down to Zone 3. And because many varieties often have really small leaves, they're great for creating contrast when planted near the larger rosettes of the sempervivums. Contrast not only of color, but of the size of the leaves. One of my favorite sedums is the Sedum dasyphilum minor, or also called Corsican stone crop. Its tiny, fleshy leaves are gray-green in color that develop soft lavender tones when subjected to full sun. It quickly grows to form a tight, 3-inch high mat that will have little white flowers throughout the summer. The gray color combined with the plum, green, and maroon colors of the sempervivums I just mentioned would make a dynamic tapestry draping down a rock wall. The third plant I adore is teucrium, and there's two varieties I like to use for nooks and crannies. The first is teucrium cassonii, which is also called Majorcan teucrium, Majorca as in Spain, which sort of tells you it grows in hot, dry, rocky climates with poor alkaline soil, perfect for the nooks and crannies or rock walls. It grows in gardens in zone 6 to 9B. It's also called fruity germander because when the small and narrow gray-green leaves are crushed, it's said to smell like pineapple. But I'll warn you, when the flowers are in bloom, it does not smell like any fruit you'd want to eat. It's sort of like mothballs, at least to my nose. But let me tell you a bit about it before you take a pass on this amazing plant. This teucrium, it quickly grows to form a dense 2 to 3 foot wide mat while remaining only 3 to 4 inches high. And trust me, you'll forgive the odd fragrance once you see the explosion of rosy colored flowers that sort of resemble the flowers of sweet alyssum. It's covered with blooms for weeks and weeks at a time, starting in late spring. Once the flowers are finished, they'll turn a rusty brown. You just need to shear them off, and it'll start producing more in just a few weeks. So while fruity germander will form a lovely mat in the garden, it also performs really well in nooks and crannies. And when planted in a pocket of soil, in a rock wall, it'll cascade down with a waterfall of rosy lavender colored flowers. It's truly a sight to behold. The second type of teucrium I use is teucrium ackermanii, sometimes called rock germander or silver germander. It can be a little harder to find, but it is so worth a hunt. This variety grows in zones 6 to 9 and is similar to the one I just talked about, except it's a little more cold hardy and it doesn't spread quite as wide. It stays closer to 2 feet wide and 3 feet high. Another difference is that its foliage is a bit lighter in color with the prettiest light gray silver tones versus the darker gray-green colors of the teucrium cassonii. This variety also blooms heaviest in spring with only sporadic blooms in the summer. Both varieties are very, very low water. They do not want a lot of water, so it makes them perfect for nooks and crannies, just like the succulents. So if you plant these two teucriums near one another, you'll have a long bloom time, with the rock germander blooming first in spring, then the fruity germander carrying it through the summer and fall. Not only that, but planted near one another allows you to create contrast in color, similar to what I was talking about with the above succulents. And because I have an extra minute, I wanted to sneak in a bonus plant for nooks and crannies, which is a third type of teucrium that I love to use. This is teucrium camedris. Summer sunshine is the variety. It's thirstier than the other two teucrium and prefers regular water, but it's just as cold hardy, maybe even more so, thriving down to zone 5. Its foliage is a lush, bright chartreuse green, which is a beautiful color contrast to the gray tones of the other two, and has small pink flowers midsummer. It also forms a much smaller mound than the others, topping out at about 6 to 12 inches tall by 12 to 18 inches wide. The second type of teucrium I use is teucrium ackermanii, sometimes called rock germander or silver germander. It can be a little harder to find, but it's so worth the hunt. This variety grows in zones 6 to 9 and is similar to the one I just talked about, except it's a little more cold hardy and it doesn't spread quite to 3 feet, but closer to 2 feet and 3 inches high. Another difference is that its foliage is a bit lighter in color with really pretty light gray silver tones versus the darker gray-green colors of the teucrium cassonii. This variety also blooms heaviest in early spring, with only sporadic blooms throughout the summer. So if you plant these two varieties near one another in a rock wall, you'll have a long succession of blooms, with the rock germander blooming first in the early spring, then the fruity germander carrying it through the summer and fall. Not only that, but planted near one another allows you to create contrast in color, similar to what I was talking about with the succulents. And because I have an extra minute, I wanted to sneak in a bonus plant for Nooks and Crannies, which is a third type of teucrium that I love, Teucrium comedris. The variety is Summer Sunshine. This one is thirstier than the other two, preferring regular water, but it's just as cold hardy, maybe even more so, thriving down to zone 5. Its foliage is a lush, bright chartreuse green, which is a beautiful color contrast to the gray tones of the other two teucriums. And this one has small pink flowers midsummer. It also forms a much smaller mound than the others, topping out at about 6 to 12 inches tall by 12 to 18 inches wide.
Oh my gosh, Steve, for once, the expert agreed with me. Rebecca said that she loves sedums and she went into them at length. I'm so excited. An expert agreed with me.
I wasn't really listening. I was too busy playing Tiddlywinks.